Imagine a train leaving Moscow, rumbling east across the endless Siberian taiga, crossing the Bering Strait on a bridge suspended above some of the most treacherous waters on Earth, and arriving in Alaska, then continuing south through Canada all the way to New York City. One continuous rail line connecting two superpowers, two ideologies, two worlds, separated by just 55 miles of frigid ocean. In 1905, this wasn't science fiction. It was a serious proposal that would captivate engineers, dreamers, and dictators for decades. And in the depths of World War II, Joseph Stalin, the man who commanded the Soviet war machine, who would reshape Eastern Europe, who ruled over a sixth of the world's land surface, became obsessed with making it real. This is the story of the most audacious infrastructure project never built. A tunnel that could have changed the course of the Cold War before it even began. This is Blueprint. The Bering Strait. 55 miles of ice-choked water separate the Chukotka Peninsula of Russia from the Seward Peninsula of Alaska. In winter, the surface freezes into a shifting, treacherous expanse. In summer, icebergs the size of buildings drift through currents that have claimed countless ships. The water depth reaches 160 feet. The weather is among the most severe on the planet. But look at a map. Right there, in the center of the strait, sit two islands. Big Diomede belonging to Russia and Little Diomede belonging to the United States. They are just 2.4 miles apart. On a clear day, you can see from one to the other. The international date line runs between them. Yesterday and tomorrow, separated by a narrow channel of water. For centuries, indigenous peoples crossed this strait. The Yupik and Chukchi moved between continents seasonally, following game, visiting family. The land itself remembers when this wasn't a barrier at all. During the last ice age, between 30,000 and 11,000 years ago, the Bering land bridge connected Asia and America. It wasn't a narrow strip, but a subcontinent called Beringia, up to 1,000 miles wide, covered in grassland and tundra. Humans first reached the Americas by walking across what is now ocean floor. The dream of reconnecting these landmasses is nearly as old as their separation. In 1890, a Colorado railroad promoter named William Gilpin proposed a cosmopolitan railway that would circle the globe. His vision included a bridge or tunnel across the Bering Strait. The idea caught fire. The late 19th century was an age of mega projects. The Suez Canal opened in 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad completed the same year, the Panama Canal under construction. In 1905, French engineer Baron Loicq de Lobel presented detailed plans to Tsar Nicholas II for a Bering Strait tunnel. De Lobel had spent years studying underwater tunneling techniques. His proposal included ventilation systems, pumping stations, emergency evacuation protocols. The project would cost $300 million, approximately $10 billion in today's currency. But de Lobel insisted it was technically feasible. The Russian government established a commission to study it. The commission spent 2 years reviewing proposals, consulting with engineers who'd worked on tunnels under the Thames River in London. They examined the geology. The strait sits on the boundary of the North American and Eurasian tectonic plates, one of the most seismically active regions on Earth. They studied weather patterns. Storm systems regularly batter the region with hurricane-force winds. They analyze ice conditions. In winter, ice thickness can reach 6 feet, generating forces of thousands of tons per square meter. In 1907, they issued their report. Theoretically possible, practically impossible. The technology didn't exist. The materials, steel and concrete that could withstand such extreme conditions hadn't been developed. The project was shelved, but the dream didn't die. It mutated, evolved, adapted to new technologies and new geopolitical realities. June 22nd, 1941. 3 million German soldiers crash across the Soviet border in Operation Barbarossa. Within weeks, they have surrounded Leningrad. They are driving toward Moscow. they are slicing through Ukraine. The Soviet Union is fighting for its survival. Joseph Stalin, 62 years old, a Georgian who rose through revolutionary politics to become absolute ruler of the USSR, faces the greatest crisis of his rule. He's already survived collectivization, the terror, the purges that decimated his own officer corps. Now Hitler's Wehrmacht is destroying his armies. But Stalin is also receiving something else. American aid. The Lend-Lease program begins flowing supplies to the Soviet Union. By the war's end, America will send over 400,000 trucks, 12,000 armored vehicles, 11,000 aircraft, 1.75 million tons of food. The total value exceeds $11 billion, roughly 180 billion today. Getting these supplies to Soviet forces is a nightmare. There are three primary routes. The Arctic convoys sail from Britain to Murmansk, running a gauntlet of German U-boats. Of 1,400 ships that attempt this route, 85 are sunk. The Persian corridor goes through Iran. Safer, but agonizingly slow. The Pacific route appears simplest. Ships sail from American West Coast ports to Vladivostok, but they must pass near Japan, and the threat of attack is constant. Stalin stares at maps. He's always been obsessed with maps, with the geography of power, and he keeps coming back to that narrow strait, 55 miles. Just 55 miles between Soviet territory and American territory. In 1942, Soviet engineer Pyotr Borisov, working in the main administration of the Northern Sea Route, begins developing a detailed proposal. Borisov, 38 years old, is one of the USSR's leading Arctic specialists. But Borisov's vision goes far beyond a simple tunnel. He proposes a dam across the Bering Strait. Not just a solid barrier, but an enormous structure that would fundamentally alter ocean circulation patterns in the Arctic. Borisov theorizes that the Arctic Ocean is colder than it needs to be because of water circulation patterns. His dam would include massive pumps that would pump cold Arctic water south into the Pacific. This would draw warmer Pacific water north into the Arctic, raising Arctic temperatures by several degrees, reducing ice coverage, making the entire Siberian coast navigable year-round. It's geoengineering on a scale never attempted. And sitting atop this dam would be the railway. Borisov presents his proposal to Soviet planning authorities. The proposal reaches Stalin's desk in 1943, probably after the Battle of Stalingrad ends in February, when Soviet victory becomes conceivable. The war is turning. Stalingrad has been held. Kursk will be won. Soviet forces are beginning their grinding advance westward, but Stalin is already thinking beyond victory. He's thinking about the post-war world, about Soviet power extending across continents. In late 1943 or early 1944, Stalin approves preliminary studies. He assigns the task to a team including Borisov and other Arctic specialists. There to determine feasibility, cost, timeline, the team works through 1944. They examine two primary approaches: a tunnel bored through bedrock beneath the seafloor, or a bridge using the Diomede Islands as stepping stones. The geological surveys reveal daunting challenges. Earthquakes regularly shake the region. The seafloor consists of unconsolidated sediments. Permafrost on both shores is frozen to depths of 1,000 feet or more. Drilling generates heat which melts permafrost, causing ground instability. The numbers are staggering. A tunnel would need to be approximately 64 miles long to reach stable ground on both shores. It would need to be bored at an average depth of 180 feet below the seabed. They would need to excavate approximately 8 million cubic meters of rock and soil, hundreds of thousands of tons of steel, millions of tons of concrete. But the Soviet Union has labor. By 1944, the Gulag system holds approximately 1.5 million prisoners. Stalin has used forced labor for other mega projects. The Loicq Sea Canal, built by 170,000 prisoners, at least 12,000 of whom died. The Kolyma Highway, killed thousands more. The team estimates it would take 15 to 20 years. Cost enormous, perhaps the most expensive infrastructure project in human history to that point. By 1945, the geopolitical landscape is shifting like ice in a spring thaw. May 8, 1945, Germany surrenders. The Grand Alliance has won, but the unity is already fracturing. At Yalta, at Potsdam, Stalin and the Western leaders eye each other warily. Who will control Poland? Germany? All of Eastern Europe? August 6, 1945. An American B-29 drops an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 70,000 people die instantly. 3 days later, another destroys Nagasaki. Japan surrenders. The war is over, and America possesses a weapon that can incinerate cities. A weapon the Soviet Union doesn't have. Stalin's calculation shifts. Does he want American trains rolling into Siberia when America has atomic weapons and the Soviet Union doesn't? Does he want a physical connection to a nation that now holds the ultimate weapon and growing suspicion of Soviet intentions? The intelligence reports flowing to Stalin's desk paint a changing picture. Former allies are becoming adversaries. Winston Churchill delivers a speech in March 1946. An iron curtain has descended across the continent. The Cold War is beginning. And there's another problem. Alaska isn't actually reachable by rail from the United States mainland. The Alaska Highway, completed in 1942, is a rough road through Canadian wilderness. No railroad connects Alaska to the lower 48 states. The nearest railroad terminus is 1,500 miles from Fairbanks. For Stalin's transcontinental railway to work, America would need to build thousands of miles of track through some of the most difficult terrain in North America. The cost would exceed the tunnel itself. Would they? The project would require unprecedented cooperation, joint planning, shared financing, access to each other's territory. During wartime, perhaps. During peacetime, between allies, maybe. Between increasingly hostile powers, impossible. Soviet records suggest that by late 1945 or early 1946, active planning for the tunnel effectively stops. Stalin doesn't formally cancel the project. He simply lets it fade. Resources are redirected, some to weapons programs. The USSR is racing to develop its own atomic bomb, some to rebuilding Soviet infrastructure devastated by war. But the dream doesn't entirely die. In 1950, Joseph Stalin gives an interview to Soviet journalist N. Osipov. He's asked about the Bering Tunnel. Stalin responds that the project will be built, but not in the immediate future. Stalin dies in March 1953. He's 74, fell out by a stroke. The tunnel dies with him, or seems to, because ideas this grand have momentum. They roll forward through history, picking up new champions, adapting to new contexts. In 1958, Soviet engineer A. B. Kogan publishes a detailed proposal for a Bering Strait crossing. It's presented as a monument to international cooperation. His tunnel would be longer, 85 miles, including approaches, using newer tunnel boring machines. It's the Khrushchev era, when Soviet-American relations thaw slightly. Khrushchev visits America in 1959. For a brief moment, peaceful coexistence seems possible. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, various Soviet engineers continue proposing versions of the project. The proposals appear in engineering journals, discussed at conferences. Most receive polite hearing and no funding. American engineers notice. In 1963, Alaska's business community begins discussing potential economic benefits. If a rail link existed, Alaska could become a transportation hub. Japanese goods could reach Europe via rail faster than by ship. In 1974, at the height of détente, the Soviet Union approaches the United States about studying the project jointly. By now, it's the era of Nixon and Brezhnev. Nixon has visited Moscow. Arms control agreements are being negotiated. Maybe such a project could be discussed seriously. The Soviets send a proposal to the State Department. They suggest forming a joint commission. They emphasize economic benefits. Nothing comes of it. The political will doesn't exist. The costs are prohibitive. American estimates put the figure at 35 to 50 billion in 1970s dollars, perhaps 200 to 300 billion today. and the technology still isn't quite there. The longest underwater tunnel in the world at that time is the Saikan Tunnel in Japan, begun in 1964 and not completed until 1988. 33 miles long, taking 24 years to build, costing $3.6 billion. The Bering Tunnel would be twice as long, in exponentially more difficult conditions. The 1970s end. The Tente collapses with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. Reagan comes to power, calling the USSR an evil empire. Talk of cooperation vanishes. The Soviet Union collapses in 1991. For Russia, the 1990s are a catastrophe. The economy collapses. GDP falls by 40%. Life expectancy drops by 5 years. But in this chaos, some entrepreneurs revive the proposal. In 1994, Russian engineer Valery Konyukov leads a team developing plans. They produce a 400-page feasibility study proposing a two-tube tunnel, each 42 feet in diameter. Electric trains would run at speeds up to 125 miles per hour. Cost estimate $50 to $60 billion. Timeline 15 to 20 years. Required workforce 100,000 workers. They identify potential benefits beyond transportation. The tunnel could carry fiber optic cables, oil and gas pipelines, power lines. No one has that money. The Russian government is barely functioning. International investors are wary. No one can organize that cooperation. The 1990s end. Putin comes to power in 1999, rebuilding a Russian state authority. But the tunnel remains unfunded, unbuilt. In 2007, Vladimir Yakunin, president of Russian Railways, proposes a new version. Cost estimate $65 billion. The project would be part of a world railway corporation linking 3 continents. Russia would connect to Alaska, which would connect through Canada to the United States, eventually extending to Europe and through a tunnel under the Strait of Gibraltar to Africa. It sounds insane, but Yakunin gets an audience with Putin. Putin likes grand projects that restore Russia's sense of greatness. Studies are commissioned. In 2011, Russian officials visit Alaska. They meet with state legislators, business leaders. They discuss possibilities, economic benefits, tourism. They shake hands. They pose for photographs. The project seems closer than ever. Nothing happens because the same obstacles remain. The cost is astronomical. More recent estimates put it at $105 billion or higher. The engineering challenges are immense. Modern tunnel boring technology has improved, but the Bering Tunnel would be 64 to 85 miles long. It would need to withstand regular earthquakes. The remoteness makes construction logistics extraordinarily difficult. Where do you house 100,000 workers? How do you supply them? The nearest significant city is Anchorage, 650 miles from the Alaska entrance point. And the geopolitics, Russia and America in the 21st century are adversaries. Russia annexes Crimea in 2014. America imposes sanctions. They fight proxy wars. Why would either nation want to create physical infrastructure linking them? Then China enters the picture. In 2013, Chinese President Xi Jinping announces the Belt and Road Initiative, trillions in infrastructure investments globally. In 2014, Chinese officials discuss a China, Russia, Canada, America railway corridor, high-speed rail from Beijing to New York, 2 days. China has the money and the engineering expertise. The Qinghai-Tibet Railway crosses permafrost regions at altitudes over 16,000 feet. But the geopolitics are even more complicated. China and America are engaged in strategic competition. Would America want Chinese-financed infrastructure on its territory? The security concerns multiply. By 2020, the Chinese proposals have quietly faded. Today, the Bering Strait looks much as it did in Stalin's time. Ice, water, 2 islands sitting in the middle of nowhere. On Little Diomede, about 110 people live in the village of Diomede, Alaska. On Big Diomede, there's a Russian border guard station. On clear days, they can't see each other across 2.4 miles of water. No tunnel, no bridge, no trains running between continents. But every few years, someone proposes it again. Another engineering study, another feasibility report, another grand vision. Stalin's tunnel that never was tells us something about human ambition, about the gap between vision and reality, about how the most audacious dreams are sometimes the most impossible precisely because they're so audacious. It reminds us that geography still matters, that despite our technology, despite our engineering prowess, there are places that resist connection, distances that remain unbridgeable, not because of engineering, but because of politics, economics, human nature. And yet, the proposals keep coming, because maybe that's what it means to be human, to look at impossible obstacles and imagine overcoming them, to see barriers and dream of bridges. What if Stalin had lived another decade? What if the Cold War had never happened? What if someone, someday, decides that 55 miles of ocean is a challenge worth $100 billion to overcome? The tunnel to Alaska that never was remains unbuilt, but the dream refuses to die, frozen in the ice, waiting, just waiting for the world to change enough that yesterday and tomorrow can finally meet.